Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Gray Matters Radio. I'm your host, America's Counselor, Michael Devine. I got the co-host, the armchair quarterback, Bill Reed with me. What is up, my man?
Michael, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing all right. You know, I think, in case you haven't been paying attention to the news the last couple of weeks, America's kind of in need of a political counselor.
Just the last couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, the last couple hundred years, but just more particularly the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think the country is in desperate need of a political
I kind of feel
counselor.
like ever since Nixon resigned, we've
Gotta go back that far.
Yeah, we've always needed that for a political kind of a counselor, but that's my opinion.
It's all right. You know, you are entitled to your opinion. That's why I have you as the armchair, man.
All right.
Yeah. So, I'm not gonna lie. I'm super excited about the show. I'm like ready to dive in here. I've been looking forward to it. I'm not gonna lie. I think I've been looking forward to this show more than any other show. You know, at the beginning of the year, I kind of told everyone, hey, we're going to do some things differently this year. I don't think I've made any mistakes or any, you know, I haven't hiding the fact that, hey, listen, we want the show to get better. We're going to try some things out, and we're going to really be working to kind of create some different content. Moreover, have some different conversations.
We're not going to be the same every time. We're
Exactly.
We're just going to do some different stuff and basically throw as much shit at the wall as we can and just see what sticks.
Exactly. And
like.
Exactly. And the whole idea is we want to have the conversations that our politicians aren't basically having. And so tonight, I think the formatting of the show is, I don't know, honestly, me personally, this is what I always wanted the show to basically be. I think tonight is one of those episodes to where I think, hey, I think we're really getting close to that. So I'm super excited. Now, I'm going to dive in. Usually I bullshit, and my wife...
Do you have anybody signing non-disclosure agreements? Because that's a big thing right now.
Well,
to make sure, you know,
how do you define non-disclosure agreements?
It depends on what your definition of it is.
You know, the way I look at it, it's my show. So anything that I say I don't like is non-disclosure. I'll delete it.
Jury.
Anything that I like that you say that you don't like, yeah, it's going to get on the air. So
just want to be clear on that.
So I get non-disclosure if I want it, but you guys don't. It's my show. It's what, you know, it's a gray area, right?
All right. Okay.
So I'm going to dive in here. So now I want to introduce our first guest, longtime friend of the show, Dan Evans. My man, what's up, buddy?
What's up, man? I'm so excited to be back. Last time we talked about coronavirus, there's been some updates on that, but we'll talk about that some other time. I'm just excited to be a part of the show.
Talking about the things that are also going to kill us: polarization, politics. And one of us is it's going to be coronavirus. It's going to be politics.
You
I don't
guys
know.
realize the day we achieve like political feng shui and political unity, the next day we're all going to die from like coronavirus or giant accident.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
The day after we all unite and go, yes, we can do anything as a people, and the guy.
Or there's going to be some asteroid. We'll have that special moment, man, and it starts here. It starts tonight.
We'll get 1 minute. We'll all be hanging out, you know, smoking out with the friends, having a little bourbon. We're going to enjoy it, and then all of a sudden.
Well, it's like the old Married with Children. Remember when the Grim Reaper came to visit Al Bundy? And he was like, are you coming to take me today? And she says, not today, Bundy. And he goes, when? He goes, the day after you hit the lottery. He's like, of course.
So speaking of hitting the lottery, we got some great stuff tonight. So now Dan, I kind of introduced Dan here first because Dan, even though Dan is our infectious disease expert, he's a great friend of the show, and he's been really, you know, helping craft the show with, hey, listen, differing viewpoints, conversations. That's how Dan and I met, basically having a shared kinship over our country being really screwed up, and we need to have different conversations. And so I've been on Twitter, I've been interacting with people, learning a bunch, and tonight is kind of the culmination of those conversations. And I know Dan's been kind of quietly watching. I'll get little notes here and there of, hey, that was good, or I don't know about that, man. So
just trying to help out, man. I'm really excited. I think you have a great message. I'm just trying to do my part.
And I appreciate that, brother. You know, so I'm going to kind of tee things up a little bit. So I've been having lots of conversations online with people, and one of the things I've been basically noticing is that, number one, when you try to attempt to engage people that think differently than you in a conversation, it seems like sure as shit there's it's almost like a conditioned response. The second I say something that isn't maybe part of like being in the in-group in whatever political circles that they run in, they automatically will start throwing like, what are you this, are you that? But it was always really cool whenever I started giving prefaces of, listen, I'm not trying to be a troll. I'm asking a legitimate question here. Mysteriously, all of a sudden, people start having conversations with you. And the number one thing that really started jumping out at me is that people don't feel heard. They don't feel heard by, I mean, hell, they don't feel heard anywhere, but they don't feel heard by their political parties. They don't feel heard by the people that represent them. The candidates that we have now, people really don't feel like anyone's talking to them. That was the one thing that people would never, ever want to admit about Trump, is that regardless of what you think about his politics, regardless of what you think about his personality, he spoke to people and people felt heard. People felt connected. And it's amazing how it's such a fundamental part of being a human being. And when we don't have that, we start getting a lot of issues. And so it was just really cool when I started talking with people and getting answers. And then so I was like, it started dawning on me of how these are people I'm talking to. And then you hear what their concerns are. You hear what their beliefs are. And then you hear a politician trying to talk to them, to convert them over. And it's like, well, who the hell are you guys listening to? What are your campaign people telling you? Why are you talking to people that way? All it's doing is this alienate them and digging their heels in even more. It's the most ineffective thing. And so I'm like, all right, what has Dan been telling me? It's about the conversations. It's about having that conversation online with everybody. And that's when I was like, you know what? What better way to really embody that, to really demonstrate the conversations that we need to be having as a country than to, well, lay out playbooks for how every single candidate can be beaten or how they can beat the other candidate. Moreover, how can we demonstrate that whole dynamic, not in a trolling way, not in a I'm right, you're wrong way, but more in a, well, if I'm trying to convince that how could Democratic Party beat Bernie Sanders? Well, do I have other people who don't like Bernie Sanders on air to chime in and say the same thing? Or do I get a Bernie Sanders supporter to actually hear what I have to say, to reflect back what I'm hearing, to present an alternative plan, to talk to them, and actually get their reaction? It's fucking mind blowing, right? Now, Dan, did I do my homework? Am I?
Dude, you've been great. I just remember a few weeks ago we just talked about different things that you can do to hone your message, and it sounds like you've really put the pedal to the metal about this. Really wanted to you say you're America's counselor, and you just keep making those steps, man. I'm really really glad that you're being the voice of reason. As a former member of a reasonable organization, right? I'm really excited to see someone pick up the banner and move that forward. So yeah, you're doing great, man. I'm really excited for the strategic direction you want to take your own content.
And I appreciate all the help. I mean, everyone's been great. I mean, everyone's social media. I can't wait because I have a lot of people that I've been talking to going, listen to the show. Tell me what you think. And that's why I'm really excited, because it's, once again, all the conversations we had tonight is when we're really embodying it. So we are embarking on a multi-part series. So this week, it's going to be how the Democrats can beat Bernie Sanders. Now, I picked the Democrats as a whole because, let's be honest, that's what the fight is really about. It is about the whole Democratic Party against Bernie Sanders. Next week, it's going to be how can Bernie Sanders beat the Democratic Party? Then we're going to do Donald Trump, how Donald Trump can beat the Democrats, how the Democrats can beat Donald Trump. And if I feel like getting to it, we'll figure out, hey, if Bloomberg is still around, we'll do the same thing with Bloomberg. But hey, we'll keep it to 1 month, 4 episodes. We'll see where we're at after Super Tuesday, right? So then I was like, all right, so how do we have the right type of person to basically be on the show? And so I just didn't want to get any Yahoo, but I also didn't want to get some person that seems like a plant. So, I talked to people and had, people recommend whatever. And we happened to get a guy. His name is David Kelly. David Kelly, he is a writer for Media Magazine. He actually is a heavy metal lead singer of a band. Tethra? Is it Tethra? David?
Yeah, you got it right. Yep.
Tethra. All right. I had to make sure I got it right. He also owns a digital marketing firm, and he is a very stout supporter of Bernie Sanders. But ironically, he was a Donald Trump supporter in 2016. So if anyone's going to be able to give it to me straight and give me an honest opinion about what I'm about to present, it's going to be him. So without further ado, David Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Dude, thanks for coming on the air. It's either you're going to enjoy it and it's going to be we're all part of a movement, or you're going to go to your friend Dan after this going to, why in the fuck did you have me on the show? You ruined my career. God
come
damn
on.
you.
I can already tell it's going to be great.
Either way, he and I are going to...
that we can't be associated with this.
Either way, he and I are gonna have some drinks after this, so we're gonna have some
I'm
fun.
drinking now. I love my bourbon, and I busted out my good E.H. Taylor tonight. It's a good episode. So
me and the guys here talked about you and your bourbon before when we were off the air, when you're out of the studio there. But
that's amazing. I love it.
You love it, don't you?
Oh, I can't get enough of it.
You want a Coors Light or anything?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
You like Coors Light, but I'm good.
Yes, that's.
I don't like piss
Coors
water.
Light, man.
All right. So, all right, so now, Dave, like, I want you to kind of, one of the things, and Dan knows the drill, I'm really big of almost like you're a witness, and I want to make sure that no one claims that you're a plant or anything, so I want you to kind of lay out your street cred. For being a Bernie supporter, who you are, what you do, so let's give a brief little overview of, your support for Bernie, and
So, I think first and foremost, alluding on what Michael was saying. So, yes, I am a vocalist in a metal band. I've been doing that for about 8 years. This new band is formed within the last year. And I went to school for marketing actually at Pitt. And when I was there, I started learning a lot about digital marketing type of stuff, not really in school, but actually marketing my own band. And within a year with the new band, we have about 70,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. So it's not too bad. But I also do digital marketing work. I actually have a lot of clients across a lot of different industries and things like that, primarily focusing in digital marketing, which I think is why I have another unique perspective in talking about this, is the marketing angle of things, and the branding thing, because that's as much a part of politics as anything. And when you want to talk about marketing and politics, you have to talk about Trump in the 2016 election. You introduced me as a Bernie supporter. I voted for Trump. Like, a lot of people are very confused, maybe how that was the case. Well, I think
such a confused person,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think both of them, I have to watch how I say this, because I don't want this to come across wrong. I think definitely the Democratic Party, ever since 2016, 2015, previous to that, has just done an awful job at combating their opposing party, right? It's like, we talk about this, me and Dan use this analogy a lot. Politics is like sports. You're playing an opposing team. You need to understand that team and how to beat them and strategize against them. And the Democratic Party has been horrible at that. And I think both parties, however, have majorly let down the American people. And you see how, and your theme of this show, right, is how can the Democratic Party beat Bernie Sanders? Well, the theme of 2016 was, how can the Republican Party beat Donald Trump? You have a lot of forces working against both candidates that I think actually have helped both candidates in both circumstances.
Absolutely.
The media was against Trump in 2016. And a lot of the ways that they would try to put him down actually made him look better to a lot of people. Now, I want to state this very clearly. I was supporting Trump not for the racism and bigotry and things like that. Like, I think, and that's another problem that the Democratic Party's had, is like simplifying all Trump voters to racist bigots. Like, that's not.
Don't you hate having to explain yourself over and over again when you were supporting
Trump?
And
I hate talking about it like that, but I have to state that, which is a ridiculous conversation to have in and of itself. Right.
Yeah.
And Trump won in part because of that. Yes. Let's be honest. Partly. Trump also won because of economic populism.
Yeah.
He and Sanders have that in common. I believe that 10%, if I remember correctly, 10% of Hillary supporters voted for Trump 10% of Bernie, people that voted for Bernie in the primary in 2016, voted for Trump in the general. Because they have a lot of economic populism overlap in their campaigning. Here's the major difference between the two of them. Trump understood, what you say whatever you want about Trump. He understands how to read a room. He understands how to read a climate. And he did that. He understood the pain points of a lot of America, especially the Rust Belt. And that's really, if you want to get down to it, that's where the election comes down to.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not a Bernie plant. I'm not anybody's plant. I'm just a normal guy. And I wanted to come on and kick this around a little bit. But really, when you look at it.
Why do you like Bernie?
Yeah,
what made you.
Between.
Okay, so I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh in a pretty conservative district. I think it votes red 96% of the time. So, with 2016, I would have been about 21, 22 years old. So you're kind of growing up through that and like decoupling that. I was graduating college, right? And I voted, I think, in a lot. I really don't have any data to back this up, but I think I voted in a lot of ways for the lesser of two evils. What I thought, right? I was tired of the establishment type Bush families and Clinton families and these right, exactly. There's so many people like that that it's just they needed a better choice. I do believe, and the data does show it, that had Bernie won the 2016 nomination, I might have voted differently. And I think a lot of people might have voted differently. And we might have a chance to replay that this year, but we'll see what happens. But the reasons that I'm drawn to Bernie are for a couple things. Authenticity. I mean, you have 40 years of evidence. You could like his policies or not like him. I don't really, that's up to you for you to decide. But the length of authenticity and how long Bernie's been fighting for these things. I mean, he was for Medicare for all when nobody was for it, even 4 years ago, right? Talk 20, 30 years ago, he was for these kinds of policies. So authenticity is one. The second is just the policies are correct. And I'm not just saying that based on what I think. I'm saying that based on data that's been conducted, polling that's been done. The reason Bernie is the most popular senator in the United States, I think 65% of people have a favorable opinion of him, is because he aligns with their ideology. The media and the establishment parties have basically kept the window of debate within a certain parameter, right? And anybody that fell out of the right or left of that was just labeled insane or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, the media and the establishment does not represent the people in the country. They don't. And the politicians, for the most part, have not represented the people in the country either. So you have Trump come along, who says a lot of things that invokes a lot of understanding in a lot of people, both racist and unracist. And you have a lot of and you have Bernie come along. The similarities there, they both have a lot of passion, fire, outrage, because that resonates with people emotionally. Marketer, those words coming in. Michael, is you as a therapist, people react on emotion.
Right.
Bernie is very strong on policy as well as he is in rhetoric and emotion. Mm-hmm. And yes, people get fired up about these things because it literally is what makes their lives. We are determining, yes, the president does not control your life or whatever, but it lays the foundation for what our society will be like. So, yeah, I was drawn to Bernie mainly based on policy. And we talked about this yesterday on the phone, Michael. Bernie's 78 years old. I mean, he's an old white guy who's losing his hair, who has a slouched posture. I don't like him for his looks. I like him for his policy. And we're voting for politicians based on policy. I remember being told when I was younger, oh, yeah, we vote for politicians based on, how they look and whatever. Basically take Obama, right? Obama. But Obama had a lot of progressive policy when he ran, governed differently. But that's what I was told people vote on politicians for. My generation is sick of that. We're tired of that stuff. So, yes, Bernie is somebody who resonates policy-wise with what I believe the future of the country should be. And I can go into that further, but I should stop speaking for a second and let you chime in here.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think, and I think you nailed it, is that there's something where people, if they try to sit there and go and boil Trump down to, oh, it's xenophobia and it's racism, it's like you don't really understand what the populace
and that's how you lose.
Yeah, you don't understand what's going on, and the Democrats almost ironically are making the same exact mistake with Bernie as they did Trump. They don't understand why Bernie is popular, and I think I kind of knew that, but it became that much more evident in my research when I was talking with people who were Bernie supporters, and that there's so much is clear that with every passing day, with every debate, that the establishment candidates still do not understand why Trump won. They do not understand, even within their own party where they have their own data, why Bernie is appealing.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and so now I'm going to do a little. So now, Dan, I'll start with you now. Dan, would you say your boy David here that he is a fair witness and a fair person to attest to being a Bernie Sanders supporter? And would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So ever since I met David, and he and I have met up multiple times. We've become good friends, I really think, and we've worked on projects outside of like policy stuff together as well. I can really attest he's one of the most authentic people I've met. Like, how many people do you know willingly are a lead singer in a heavy metal band, a graphic designer, and he also didn't talk about his bodybuilding. He started bodybuilding. Well, I mean, he's been working out for years, but he started bodybuilding as an amateur or novice, whatever the component was, this year. And you drop like, I don't know, you shredded like 40 pounds to get the whole like look and put like a bunch of orange goo all over you, and you won a contest, right? So like this dude, David is in many ways extraordinary in my opinion, but he is a guy who sticks to his guns in everything that he does. And I think that's the kind of person that we need to come on and say things honestly and represent people who are willing to have a strong voice and express who they are. And he expresses himself as who he is in every element of his life. And I deeply respect that about him. So I think
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I think he's the perfect kind of guy to come on the show and express his opinions, because even though like he is a unique person in terms of who he is, what he does and everything, he does have the authenticity that we need in order to talk about what, and he's aware, he has the awareness of what's going on in our community and the problems that face our demographic, the disenfranchised 20 somethings that have come out of college with a bunch of debt and not realizing that the world doesn't work the way that we've been told it's worked for like the past 15 years of our lives. So yeah, I testify for David very, very strongly.
All right, Bill. All right, so we have to have consensus here. So Bill, would you say, just based on what you've heard, that David will be a good subject to really get a good, honest reaction to?
I think so. I mean, he's been very honest, and that's not to sound like a broken record, but let's be honest today. A lot of the time in the media, whether you agree with it or not, they in all media I'm talking about, there's a slant to it. Every story they say,
shit's at an angle.
Yeah, it's at an angle. They have an agenda, left and right. Everyone's got a freaking agenda. So, like, one of the things I love about this show is we really try not to, even though we have preferences and we have our own opinions and we have our likes and dislikes, as a whole, we try to be open-minded. We try to be honest with ourselves and with all of our viewers and listeners. So, based on that, I do think he's very authentic. Just I've heard.
We have a consensus.
I believe so.
All right.
If he's not, I will disavow all knowledge. I will burn this after watching.
All right, we got consensus. So I say let's saddle up. You guys ready to dive in here? Okay, so all right, I'm gonna like give some backstory, because I don't want to sit there and act like I'm just putting something at an angle. This is all about transparency. So, what my initial kind of thought was like, okay, I want to try to dive into Bernie Sanders supporters, and not like I kind of know what they believe, but I was more interested in why is it that they have such strong opinions about the rest of the candidates, what they really feel about moderatism, and why I decided to tackle that one. At least why I'm talking about it first is that was the overwhelming thing I kept hearing from Bernie Sanders supporters online, that moderatism is basically pandering to the right. And if you're pandering to the right, well, then they win. Why in the fuck we pandering to them? They don't pander to us. And it was interesting because when I kept trying to get, like, well, this is like a marriage and it's about when you're in the middle, and it's like, well, no, everything is about the right is doing this, the right is doing that. When I brought up questions of like, okay, I totally understand that, totally get where you're coming from. When we start talking about the funding of these plans and I kept, one of the things I kept referencing back to was actually something Joe Biden said in a couple debates ago, where he was like, listen, I was the one into the Senate and the House trying to get Obamacare passed. And that was when we had a majority in both houses. And even then, it was a dogfight. We had to water it down. And in this environment, to try to pass something so polarizing, when I kept bringing that point up, and I go, as an independent, moderate voter, I go, that's the most important thing to me. But everything, that moderate word was basically code for you're pandering to the right, you're compromising, it's watered down. All it is a watered down version of what Bernie is trying to present to pander to the right to get the past, and it's not going to work. So why in the hell would we do that? They pretty much had a plan of everything was about win the most amount of seats, win the most amount of seats, win the most amount of seats. And when I tried pressing a little bit on, well, what's a route to that? Because you're talking about a supermajority. You need 70%. I'm not even seeing a map that shows right now of you guys even getting the Senate back, but it didn't matter. And it stood out to me, and I respected it. And I always made an effort to tell people that, because I think everyone's so used to trolls. Whenever I'd ask questions, I learned I had a preface it going, listen, I'm not trying to troll you. I'm actually serious when I ask this. Why is that? And I kept asking further and probing questions, which was awesome. And I always made sure to go, listen, I respect how passionate you are. What I'm trying to understand is, like, where's the thinking about, like, the practicality, reality? And to them it goes, it doesn't matter what the reality is. What matters is what we feel as though is right, what is ethical. And if we don't fight for that, if we just compromise on that, well, then what's the point of getting involved? And that's where a lot of it kind of ended. And I kept getting this distinct sense that the whole idea of what moderatism is something where, in a Bernie Sanders supporter, it's very much something where you might as well be a Republican, and it's a watered down thing. It's not like something that's different and unique. And that was something where I'm like, you know what? If I'm listening to a lot of the other Democrats, I have to agree with that. What they are presenting is very vanilla, very watered down, very just nothing bold, nothing progressive. Progressive doesn't, to me, necessarily mean, at least as an independent, doesn't necessarily mean it has to be far left or far right, but it's bold. It's a new idea. Why try to, like, reformulate something? Why try to change the name of something if we know it's not going to work, right? A Chevy Nova is still a fucking Chevy Nova, regardless of what you call it. And I respected it was intelligent answers. I respected the passion, and I started thinking back to what I remember being like when I was in my 20s. My first election that I voted in was the Gore, the Al Gore, George Bush. That was my first election, and I remember being idealistic. I remember having these grand ideas, but then I remember going, "What happened to that?" and literally, what happened to it was, how many times did I hear politicians talking about a grand plan, something they were going to do, something that was going to work? And the bottom line, it came down to either kind of get it passed. It was so watered down. They straight up lied. And I tried getting that across to some of the people I was talking to. And I got a distinct sense that as a middle-aged, college graduate white guy, I might as well be put out the pasture.
Who's middle-aged?
When we
We're
kind
the
of
same age.
40.
I'm not middle-aged.
I'm 40.
You might be middle-aged.
I guess I'm 40, right? But that's a distinct sense that I got, that almost like we're so jaded, we're basically considered the establishment. I had several people tell me that. But this was where the interesting part was, and this is where I was so excited for tonight's show. When I made the comment of, but what if moderatism can be something bold? It's not watered down. It's not... The purpose of it isn't to compromise, but the purpose of it is it's a different solution. It's a different way of approaching the problems that we face in this country. A lot of it the same exact problems that we all share. And what if that was moderatism? Mysteriously, that's when people's opinions started changing. Not to agree with me, but I'll listen to your show. I will listen to what you have to say when it became about a new idea, a different way of approaching it. And that's when I was like, this is tonight's show. This is the next 4 weeks of shows of what if it's about presenting an alternative way of thinking, alternative solutions. It's not about right, wrong. It's different solution, different idea, not necessarily a different ideology, but, and that's why I was like, you know what? Let's see if by a hypothetical policy position that no candidate, mind you, what I'm going to present here in 1 second is not a policy proposal by any candidate that's out there. It is simply my view of what moderatism should be. It's about looking at the problems that we all face. And if we offer up that new solution, do we get people to listen differently and go, you're right, maybe there are different ways of looking at it. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. So when I started looking at, I agree with Bernie Sanders supporters with what the problems of this country are. Our country is completely corrupt. I think a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, and Bernie himself will admit that, our country, the people that run this country, they're greedy. It's basically fiefdom and serfdom, but there's no land anymore. It's money. And they realized, probably from multiple revolutions over the eons, right, that if you don't give people enough, they'll have a revolution. We saw it with the French Revolution, right? And I think a lot of times people point to the wealth disparity gap as what we're at right now. This is where it was at during the French Revolution. And let's be honest, the wealthy in this country, they will only give the rest of us what they absolutely have to give us to prevent us from rioting. And I think for a long time, our government served as the referees. They were able to sit there and go, you know what? Okay, we're not going to overcall the game because like in the NFL, if you call too many penalties, you stifle the game and it sucks. No one wants to watch it. However, though, if you don't have any referees, well, then there's cheating. People are going to get hurt. And that's what I feel as though Democrats and Republicans, that's what we vacillate in between. We over-referee the game. We under-referee the game.
There's no happy middle. It's just kind of all or nothing.
Exactly. And that's what they make us think. It's like you have to choose one flavor, chocolate or vanilla. It's like, there's like 5,000 other flavors. Like I was at Baskin Robbins the other day. I know there are. Don't tell me there aren't. And that's where I look at there is a middle ground. And so when we're looking at how corrupt our government is, we're talking about companies that have bought and paid our government so they will make the government basically cater to them. That's what Citizens United was. It's really fucked up if you think about it. On the very premise, on the very argument they made with Citizens United was that you're restricting free speech of businesses by not allowing them to contribute unlimited. So we traded off giving the 1%, pretty much the 0.1%, unlimited voice because we can't stifle theirs. But because our government is completely predicated on you get FaceTime the more money you give. So for the 0.5 or the 0.1% of wealthy corporations and people can have unlimited free speech, we completely stifle the free speech of the rest of the 95% of us. And we wonder why our government only serves them. And who is
they
it?
Donate more.
You got it.
Come on, man.
And think about it. Who are we serving? Think about their morals. We're talking about an aircraft company that knew their product was defective, but out of fear of what it was going to do to their shareholder value, they didn't say anything. Even after 300 people died in one accident, they let it go. They let it go even after the second one, and they even tried getting it to where they weren't going to ground those planes. We're talking about car companies that have put out defective products, and because they are afraid of what the cost of it's going to be, the negative perception, they put profits before the safety of people.
GM.
I would,
Toyota.
if I can jump in real quick about this,
Yeah.
I think one perspective that I have is that we can talk about, the money is running our government. That's 100% true. The side of it that I think really appeals to me about people who are willing to be, I don't want to use the word radically for want of a better term, but people who want to kind of challenge the status quo is that when the money in politics situation is only allowed as long as we the people allow it. If we come up and say this is not okay, we're going to stand up and do something constructive about this, that's when things change. That's what happened. That's how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got elected.
Yeah.
People in her district stood up and say, we are tired of the status quo. And so regardless of whether or not you're on the left or on the right, Trump came up and he challenged the status quo. Bernie, both in 2016 and now, has challenged the status quo. David and I have had many favorable conversations about Andrew Yang, who unfortunately couldn't get his own thing. But Yang was the only Democratic presidential nominee who had a positive approval rating among Democrats and Republicans.
Yep.
Right, consistently above the board, because he was willing to come up and say different things, challenge what was already being talked about, and people supported that. So, but to bring it back to the money situation, as long as we just grumble and just say, oh well, our politicians are bought and paid for, but then just continue to accept what is there, there's still going to be the glad handing in Washington. There's still going to be the corporate money. As long as we're satisficed, which is the term that people use to say, like, oh, you're not really happy with it, but you're not unhappy with it enough to do something about it. That's the barrier from our side. So more people need to stand up and present a voice, whatever their voice is, that is not, they're not just being passive about it. So the more people who are standing up and doing something, saying something, acting out, doing something that's like not what the media and what the mainstream people want us to say, that's when change is going to happen, regardless of when you're left, right, or center.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a perfect segue, because when we look at like, well, why is it we all agree to it? I agree with everything that Bernie says about how screwed up our government is, how the corruption, how everything caters to wealthy. I am so on board with that. And that's what I love about Bernie. I love Bernie as a human being. I think he's a great person. He's one of the only candidates.
He's very authentic. Whether you agree with his policies
exactly.
or not, he does. Like, and I don't necessarily agree with his policies. I don't know that they can work in this country.
You can trust him,
but
though.
I can tell you when I look at him. The one thing that I do like about him, he does not seem like a lying sack of shit.
No.
And a lot of these politicians on the left and the right do.
He doesn't hide from that.
He does seem at least authentic. He at least seems like someone who cares and who believes he's doing something for better for the change.
100,000%. Yeah. But then Dan, you brought the whole point is that as people, we know that, but yet how do we get duped into allowing this to happen? Well, think about what happened with the prescription drug bill that was passed by the House, where they were going to force the pharmaceutical companies to maintain the same pricing that they charge with Medicare, TRICARE. And you know what our pharmaceutical company said? Oh, by the way, if you guys do that, we're going to put out 3 less life-saving drugs per year. That is not even veiled. That is a mafioso-esque, oh, if you do that, people are going to die. Don't make us do this. The companies do that. If you do this, we're going to have to lay people off. If you do that, this is what's going to happen to the economy. They use fear. They scare us basically into going, oh my God, what's going to happen? We literally have corporations, and it's the most un-American thing that nobody has the balls to say, but we have corporations that ideally, now I get it, they are the lifeblood, so they do have a lot of power, but we have corporations that are willing, they're willing to hold up the gun to the head of the American economy going, don't make me do this if you don't give me what it is you want. It's like fighting Al-Qaeda or ISIS. You're fighting an enemy that is willing to go to the umpteenth degree to get what it is they want. And that is the scariest thing.
And that's what I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I worry about Bernie getting elected. Okay, forget about his ideas and everything. I worry that Bernie, in some people's eyes, and I mean like the powerful people in this, the real powerful people, the Wall Streets, for example, is, there's already articles out there saying that Wall Street doesn't like Bernie, and the Dow Jones, the stock market could really go down if Bernie comes to power, which it might. I don't know. I'm not really a stock guy, so I don't know. But like, part of me feels that, like, let's say the people rise up. Let's say the people vote Bernie, and we really want change. Like, we want to get rid of all this corporate greed, all the DC, really truly drain the swamp in Washington. I almost feel like the decision makers, and you can hold that for whoever you think that really is, I almost feel like they would do, whether the Wall Street or whatnot, they would almost like tank Bernie. They would almost like tank the economy on purpose, just enough, because they're rich. They can handle a recession or even a depression.
Yeah. So, this is a common thing that people
worry about
who are worried about Bernie, but like, I like what he says. They don't say, and I think in the conversations I've had with him, David has some really good thoughts to weigh in. So I want to hear what he has to say in terms of in direct response to that concern, which seems to be the most predominant concern. I like Bernie, but I'm afraid of what will happen if he gets into power. Bernie. I want to hear what David has to say.
Well, it's not just Bernie, real quick. It's just, I feel like it's almost like the other people would tank him just to be like, see, I hope you learned your lesson. Radical ideas don't work. Now vote for. That's what I worry about. And not that Bernie has bad ideas per se.
I'm gonna ask you very pointedly that if we have companies, okay, that are, literally, think about even the environment. We have corporations that have their own children that are knowingly polluting the environment, changing the laws to make it easier to do it, knowingly are fucking the environment for their own children and put profits above their own children's future. And I'm going to have you answer this one question. I'm going to go right back into my policy proposal. But that is my fear, that they're willing to do all these things. Do you feel as though it's a fair worry to have what are companies going to do? And I think Bernie on a town hall last night gave Chris Cuomo and said his policy proposals, even with the new child care for all, free child care, $40 trillion. That was in Bernie's numbers. If all those taxes go into effect, is it fair to wonder what the retribution is going to be by these companies?
That I respect what you guys are saying. I think the whole slant of this conversation is like, not like what you guys are saying. Like, you're kind of repeating a lot of what, the criticism is against him, right? It's the complete veil of transparency of how much corruption there actually is. We're talking about would large corporations tank the stock market to blame it on Bernie? I mean, you're talking
I'm
like
worried that some of them really might, though. Like, I mean, and again,
But-
that's not a knock on Bernie.
right.
I just feel like they'd be like, well, we're going to show these people.
I think that what you guys are talking about actually plays into his narrative even more, right? Because it's like the rich and powerful the corporations and stuff. And let me preface this, okay? And I think this is something that's very. I know you want to get your pulse. I just want to say this.
Oh, no, please.
I think this is very maligned with Bernie supporters or left or whatever. Dan was talking about, I do bodybuilding. I am I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in music and stuff like that. So I'm a very driven person, right? And there's this cognitive dissonance idea that like you can't be those things and also support someone like Bernie, right? And I hear a lot of talk about that. What Bernie, his whole thing and why I'm drawn to it is it's like your house catches on fire, right? We're talking about something like healthcare, right? Your house catches on fire. You call a fire department. You pay taxes to the fire department. It's not a question. It happens. It's over with. The fire department comes and sprays your house down, and that's it. So and there's no inherently socialist or capitalist economies in the world. Everything's a mix at this point. There's no inherently pure one or another. Even China is not purely communist. China has some private companies and things like that. What we're talking about is what is off the playing field. What are the things that's going to make someone like me, who was born in a middle class family, have just as equal shot at being, take your pick, CEO of Exxon. I'm just making this up here. And the kid from 3-4 minutes down the street from me who was born in poverty, right? So what is going to give us the equal playing field with things like this? That's what draws me to Bernie's campaign, right? Because you're talking about taking these things off the table. They shouldn't be discussions. Like, we don't talk about high school education. Should it be tax exempt? Should it be funded by public taxes, or should families pay to go to school? Guess what? There was a conversation in time at one point about that. We don't talk about that anymore. We accept that. We say, oh, that makes complete sense. Like, you're talking like people would have to pay to go to high school. That's ridiculous. But at one point in time, I think until the 1960s, there was places where it wasn't like that, right? So the fact is, the whole conversation, and when Bernie is said to be a radical, this and that, it's only because of the established parameters of debate that's had. Bernie on an international scale is not a radical at all. He's very centrist. Okay, he's very moderate. I'll give you a good example of this. His healthcare policy is more of a compromise. It's not a full government takeover like in the United Kingdom. The government is just the administrator. It's not a full takeover. But I think that the problem is that this conversation gets so wrapped up. Oh, what if I understand what you're saying. I think it's a very valid concern. However, it's just that the conversation, the fact that this even exists, just shows the problems that exist to begin with.
Now I want you to speak to that. I purposely queued up this conversation because this is what is happening on the debate stage. This is what's happening online. It's the same circular logic. And I want you to talk about, as a Sanders supporter, what was the emotion you felt? Because it was instantaneous. I saw it, and I'm glad it triggered in the right way. I was hoping it was actually going to be effect, right? What is the emotion that you felt when you heard me trying to justify how fucked up our government is, how fucked up the corruption is, and how almost using, well, what if there's retribution? What was the emotion as a Bernie supporter you felt when I made that connection?
I mean, it's just pure disdain. It's like, I mean, it's like that. I think now we're at such a point now where, and that there are really no attacks that stick to Bernie at this point. And this is what people have to resort to is, oh, well, what if the elites of the country crash the economy? It's like, well, isn't that exactly what his whole message is? That they shouldn't have that much power to begin with? Yeah. Like, no one person. Like, okay, I have an uncle who's very, very wealthy. Okay, he is not even nowhere close to a billionaire. No, I don't even think he's probably worth $20-30 million. Do you have any clue? Like, I know him personally, right? He is probably worth, let's say, $10-15 million. Do you have any idea how much money that is? Then you talk about somebody like Michael Bloomberg, who's worth 52 billion, 60 something,
billion.
Yeah, it was like
500 times more than a multimillionaire.
Right. Yeah. And then so if Jeff Bezos gave everybody in the United States, what was it, Dan? $10, he would still have more money than Michael Bloomberg.
No, the statistic that we found out that was circulating online, it was if you earned, what was it, $7,000 an hour from the birth of Christ to 2020, you still wouldn't have as much money as Jeff Bezos has.
This is the thing, right? I am
$7,000 an hour over 2020 years, and you still wouldn't have as much.
And that's what these silly discussions about. Well, Bernie has 3 homes. It's like, that's not the point. Bernie never once has said, "Yeah, you shouldn't be able to be a millionaire, be a successful businessman." Never once said that. Yeah. The discussion is about obscene wealth, obscene corporate control. We're not talking about, like, these big businesses make it hard for smaller business to exist. Smaller businesses should be the foundation of America. It should not be Amazon and Apple and Facebook and like that are controlling the corporate landscape. And you know what? These politicians that are running against Bernie, they're all taking money from these people and from these Pete Buttigieg have over 40 billionaires donate to him. The thing is, we have to shift the conversation. It's like, and something you brought up, Michael, real quick, last thing I promise, is we're talking about, well, what's going to happen if Bernie gets in office and he runs up against stalemate and has to spends too much political capital, things like that. The reason I supported Bernie at the outset versus Elizabeth Warren, for example, is his theory of change. His theory of change is building a coalition of groups, people, to ensure that when he's elected, it's not just like, okay, Bernie, go do your job, whatever. No, people will be, if you don't pass this agenda, people will be in the streets. He will take the Trump tactic of going and campaigning against his own, Democratic Party and saying, hey, you're not passing the bill. 60% of America wants this bill passed. I'm going to support your primary competitor. So the theory of change is different. And I think it's something, this whole thing is going to start with Bernie. Yeah. And it's going to have to be, the torch will have to be carried on by somebody after him. But I think that this is where it would start. In my opinion.
Yeah. And
I just want to jump in real quick as an aside to what, I'm sorry, I had to cut off. Oh, no. I think something that David really made a mention of, talk about like the Pete Buttigieg having multi-billionaire donors. Tom Steyer, multi-millionaire. I think, is he a billionaire or somewhere up there? Steyer's a billionaire. Right, he's a billionaire. Bloomberg's a billionaire. Steyer and Bloomberg literally bought their way into this campaign, right? Literally, the only reason they're on there is because they had hundreds of millions of dollars to drop on this. And the other side is that Andrew Yang as well.
Like I'm saying his democracy dollars proposal is what I think should be implemented to combat that, right? If you want to talk about that, Dan, I think you.
I want to talk about that at some other point. But the main thing I was trying to get is, you mentioned about the billionaires running the country. I think another way to frame this is like how fucked up the situation is that the biggest return on investment, the biggest ROI that a large corporation can make is donating to political campaigns. Right? You drop a couple $1 million on a swing state Senate seat that's going to get you over the threshold for some kind of lucrative bill that's going to make your company hundreds of millions of dollars in the next 10 years. Why would you not do that if you have an ROI of like 50-fold, 100-fold over 10
it's actually
years?
There was a study done, University of Kansas, I think in 2010, and they proved that it's 22,000% ROI. Think about that.
Yeah,
think about that.
Just to put that in, if I drop $10 into the stock market, for example, and I had that much 22,000% ROI, I'd probably be a millionaire, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Or it's 22,000 with 220,000. I'd be able to buy a house with a $10 investment. Yeah. Like how is that? How is that fair?
It's better than Bitcoin.
Now, and this is like, I'm real curious because this is like the power of why I wanted to tee this up the way that I did, because it's about how do you manufacture emotion. It's tough, but you have to sometimes do it a certain way. And when you like hear people make the comments like I made about, well, what if these people get retribution, but in the absence of a plan that is actually about bold and addressing it, how do you interpret that as a Sanders supporter when it's, well, what if this happens? But here's my moderate plan that is basically milquetoast. How do you interpret that as a Bernie Sanders supporter of what their intentions are?
So I don't think that it's I'm not somebody who really has like a problem, like outrage with these milquetoast plans or anything like that. I just don't think they're the best option. I'll give you exact reason why. Means tested programs don't do well. And if I don't know if you guys know what I mean by that, but like universal programs inherently are more popular because everybody participates in them. It's harder to cut Social Security. It's harder to cut Medicare and things like that because everybody pays into them and everybody reaps the benefits from them. So when you have everybody invested in something, it makes it a lot harder to repeal that. I'll give you a perfect example again, Obamacare, right? Obamacare was actually basically a plan that was put forward by the Republicans in the 90s. And this goes back, I think Dan and I have talked about this in bar conversations before. I think half of the strategy for Bernie, as much as I agree with his policy, and I do think he will fight for it, a lot of this is negotiation. If you start from, okay, we're going to have a public option, where are you going to end? You're going to have to, you immediately, that's the furthest you're going to go. So then you're going to end up here, right? So if you start from here, then you might end up here, right? And I think
for those of us who are watching, I think the audio goes up, so he's like you're gesturing across the street, so like it's like the public option's kind of in the center, in which case you're just going to have to shift right. But if you start further left, you have more room to play, right?
So it's like you're negotiating for a job salary, right? And you end up wanting to make $50,000. You don't go in and say, yeah, I want $50,000. You say, I want 65, and they say, well, you can get 45, and then you say no, blah, 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 and then you end up at 50, right? That's what I think, and actually, that's why I really think that the Medicare for All proposal should have been it should have been like the NHS style, because you had a better chance of landing there. I'm not saying I'm not a political expert either. I'm just going off of where I think that's heading. But I think that if you start, the problem is not with I think with Bernie and it not ending up there. The problem is somebody like Biden or Buttigieg's healthcare plan. You're never going to get it. And even if you get it, the Republicans going to come in next and repeal it. If everybody has the same healthcare policy, the same way they're doing it, then there's a better chance, and it makes it a lot harder to repeal that. If you now cover 87 million more Americans on healthcare, how are you possibly going to repeal that? There will be people in the streets rioting. I mean,
that's just the reason why Obamacare has been so tough to repeal, because that's the reality of it.
Right.
Yeah. There have been enough. So I actually, just to jump in real quick, and not to try to derail David's point, trying to support it. So I'm a public health student, and one of the dean of the public health school that I'm in was the former Secretary of Health for the state of Pennsylvania, and he was heavily involved in the Clinton administration, and then also helping write some of the legislation for Obamacare. And he said to this point into our entire class, like, one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to repeal and replace Obamacare is that there were enough elements that were fundamental changes to how we viewed healthcare that people just saw as good ideas. And I think that feeds into the ideas that one of the reasons why I love the show so much, and the message you have, Mike and Bill, is that there's so much that we have in common when we think about what's gray. Right? We can think like Bernie and Trump supporters have so much in common because they feel like they're not listened to. They feel like they're disenfranchised. They feel that Washington doesn't work for them. And like that's so much of their ideology is united, and then they go in different directions, right? So that's the same idea with like when you say healthcare's broken in this country, we need some fundamental changes to that. When those fundamental changes get made that people can agree on, it's going to be much harder to repeal the whole thing when you try to pull something that people have agreed upon as a good idea. So that's like just to kind of further David's point. I'm not trying to cut anyone off. My bad.
No. And I think that's a really good point, because here's the thing. And this is where I really think, again, another thing that draws me there. I'm 26 years old now. And as you know, in this country, when you're 25, turning 26, with the way healthcare is now, kicked off your parents' insurance. What do? I work for myself. What did that mean for me? I had to go out and search all around for healthcare and blah, blah, blah. Guess what that does? That in and of itself makes it a lot harder to be an entrepreneur. It makes it a lot harder to do that. And so, you know what else does? Student loan debt. The problem is that and this is why it goes back to, it's not about like the ordinary human being, the ordinary American. It all comes back to, and why I think the principal message of any real campaign should be the corruption side of things, getting money out of politics. That is why we don't have, if you look down public opinion polls, America is like pretty progressive, but why isn't weed legal? Why isn't there common sense background checks for guns? Why isn't there a public tuition for college? Why isn't there a public healthcare system? It's because you have candidates like Pete Buttigieg and some of these other people that take money from pharmaceutical companies, tech companies, whatever, who, like with Citizens United, it's just about, that's just freedom of speech. Okay, fine. But here's the thing. Do you think they're gonna govern in a way that's going to be sympathetic to the people that gave them the most money, or you and me who gave them $20?
Yeah.
That is the problem. And when you look at Bernie, who's funding his campaign? Individual people. Yes, he's gotten money from the Sunrise Movement and Our Revolution, like movement organizations, sure. But the majority of that large amount of money he's raising, almost all of it, 90%.
It's not large. It's record shattering.
It's record shattering money.
Enormous.
And guess what? Obscene. Bernie is the first candidate from a Republican or Democrat who has ever won the popular vote in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, because he's tapping into a sentiment that if you agree or disagree with it, with what he is proposing policy-wise, there is a lot of Americans that agree with the sentiment of it. Because what I was taught growing up and coming from a middle-class family is a lot different than what is actually taking place on the ground. And that's why, like I said, like it or not, if you're coming at this, like a great example of the outsider Washington thing, you had, Yang's very outsider, Bernie's very outsider. But then you have somebody like Pete Buttigieg. I keep bringing him up, but he tries to paint himself as this Washington outsider, but every one of his policy proposals is like milquetoast Washington standard type of policy proposals. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, why did he switch from somebody who was supportive of Medicare for all or things like that? Why is he now not a supporter of it? Maybe because he's getting campaign contributions from healthcare executives and healthcare employees and healthcare companies. This is just so obvious. And it's so obvious to me. And it's hilarious that you're talking, Michael, about, well, why can't these Democrats understand why Bernie's popular? It is mind blowing to me how you can't understand that. Like,
well, even
if you're
if
a paid consultant.
So I was gonna say, even if let's say you took away the campaign finance part to it of like he's getting his money from these people, right? Whether it be Biden or whoever we're talking about. Yeah. Do you have a reason to vote for them based on their policies that you hear?
That's the thing. It's like, what are they running on? If I asked you, what is Joe Biden running on? I mean, can you tell me?
He can beat Trump. That's what he's.
Yeah,
what he's
right.
saying.
And it's funny because he can't even win second or third place in New Hampshire and Iowa. So how is he going to beat Trump? It's hilarious.
And that's the problem. Is that in this, once again, perfect segue. You guys are awesome. You do my job easy, right?
I don't want to cut into your segue. I just have one more thing I want to add. I'm so sorry, Mike, and then I'll let you.
You're the guest. You can do what the fuck you want.
Of course, yeah. I'll just say fuck you all. I'm okay. I think what's really important is that. So something else that you're talking about, Joe Biden not really having a message and Pete Buttigieg having kind of a watered down campaign. If you think David just said, well, Pete Buttigieg is an insider. Well, if you go by the identity politics that have been fed to us, Buttigieg is the ultimate outsider. Right? Never held political office. The youngest guy. He's gay. Like he fits all these things. It's like, wait, these are ticking all the boxes of like he's not this consensus guy. But when you actually dig into the policy, which is one thing that David mentioned earlier, is like when you start looking at policy and you stop going by like how you feel about the candidate, the substance melts away. Yeah. Right. Bernie is of all the candidates, Bernie is the biggest insider. He's the guy who's been in Washington the longest. Exactly. But he acts like the outsider because he's been authentic. Yeah. And that's the thing. Washington insider and Washington outsider is basically a synonym for authenticity.
It's a mentality.
And honesty. Yeah. It's a mentality. It's not whether or not it's identity politics. If you try and do identity politics, it doesn't work. It's not right.
And in the same token, you can be. I actually do believe this. You can be a billionaire and be a qualifiable candidate. I actually think Tom Steyer in a lot of ways is, because
I
it's not
actually
about
liked a lot of what he said.
right.
Yeah.
It's not about what like you. I don't think like having money disqualifies you. Like that's so dumb to even say. It's who you are and your track record and all that stuff. Like the difference, Steyer and Bloomberg are both billionaires, but they're not even in the same playing field in terms of their ideology or what they believe. It's you're not qualified, and that's something that Buttigieg misses is you're not an outsider just because you're gay and from South Bend and we're the mayor there. Like you're an outsider because you challenge the status quo, right?
I love that you say that, because it's a lot of times what I hear from insiders, policy people, campaign directors is, well, it's about emotion right now. And it's like, well, no, this is about yes and no. Policy is emotion, and emotion is policy right now. And the problems we face as a country are so great. We are paying attention to policy. We are paying attention. Is this going to actually work? And that's where I think why the argument, I could be wrong, and I'll use this as my way of diving into my stump speech for why I should be president, is that you can bring emotion into it, but it's really about solving the problems that make us emotional. I agree with every single thing that Bernie says about what the problems are in this country. I agree 100% with where we need to go as a country and what our duty to our country is and what is right and what is wrong. Where I kind of, in my policy proposal, once again, this is what I believe would be a moderate proposal of a new style of politics. It isn't milquetoast. It's just a new way. And my whole idea is what's going to solve the problem with my understanding of what I think the problems are, and what do I think will actually have a stance of passing, and what do I think actually has the lowest amount of risk with considering how fucked up our government is. So I broke it down to three kind of categories: tax reform, healthcare, and actually college tuition reform. So when I kind of looked at our tax reform, and so one of the big things that we're hearing a lot from people is, what if, everything is so corrupt with these businesses? Well, oh my God, like they're going to hold the country hostage. And you're very well right. Now and I think if you talk to a Bernie supporter, that is not a reason not to vote for Bernie. That's just calling out the obvious. Like, you're right, it is that fucked up. So if it is that fucked up, why is it that we can't, or why is nobody coming up with a proposal that accounts for how fucked up it is, but then also can neutralize that threat and accomplish the same thing? One of the things that I look at is, think about with our children. Whenever you guys have children, I don't know, we're old, Bill and I, so we got kids, right? You guys are young. So the thing is, like,
I don't have the income.
if like,
and you never will. Just FYI.
So
never will.
So the thing is, like, when we look at, one of the things we always hear about tax cuts, right, and the whole trickle-down economic theory, right, is that, well, if you give the businesses their money, it frees them up to do whatever. But then 9 times out of 10, and we saw this with the Trump tax cuts, is that what most of it went to was stock buybacks. It went to, bonuses. Like, it really didn't have the stimulating effect that we wanted to. Economic data came out just the other day talking about how the majority of this country is still living paycheck to paycheck, and that the jobs actually were added to the economy, but they're low-paying jobs. They're low-quality jobs. This is the own CBO of Trump's government, the hand-picked people. So we look at going, well, we can keep, trying to give people their money and cross their fingers they don't do stock buyback, right? But then once again, on the other side, the alarmist side is sitting there going, well, if we sit there and just tax them straight up right off the bat, we're over-regulating it. They're going to have retribution, and they are fucked up enough to hold the country hostage and create create a situation that where think about it, if you're a college student or college age, young 20-something, and below, and you were responsible for electing Bernie Sanders, and then they raised the taxes to that tax rate where you're going to cost a lot of wealthy people lots of money, it probably would be naive to think that the businesses are going to wrap their arms around you and can't wait to hire you. And I think this country, I think the business people will totally fuck over the college people. I think they will hold them hostage, and they're going to make them pay for it.
They already are.
They already are.
Yeah,
I think they're going to do it even worse. I think it will be bad. But the thing is, that's still not a reason to not do something. My thought was, what if there was another solution that was addressing the same issue, but a way that had actually a different way of addressing it? My thought was, what if we completely reformed the tax code to where if you want a tax cut You have to earn it. Far too long in this country, we're giving them their tax cuts, hoping and praying that they do right with it. Well, why is it we're doing that? Why is it that we can't just have a nominal tax code, a tax rate for corporate taxes? You can do whatever the fuck you want. If you don't want to play ball,
it's about money and politics.
I know. But the whole idea, though, is that, well, if you want a tax cut, earn it. Do something that actually is about making America great again. You want a tax cut? Bring jobs back that you outsourced over. I'll give you a tax cut that actually makes it almost equal to what China and India is manipulating their currency to pay lower people. If you want a tax cut, hire more people. You want a tax cut? I actually want to create a ratio between your C-level, your executive bonuses, and your lower level people. And so instead of making it mandatory to raise your minimum wage, you want a tax cut, have a lower ratio between what your upper level people make and your lower level people. The closer you are, so basically the more you pay your lower people and the less you pay yourself, you get a tax cut. Everything is predicated on what you do for this country. You don't have to do anything. But the reality comes down to is that why are we not using the tax code to push and not manipulate, to influence our businesses to do what is right for this country? If you don't want to do it, it's free market. You can do what you want, but you're not going to get that tax cut. You have to earn it. And we would get our tax revenue that we want. We would have a free market, so we're not over-regulating it. We would make Republicans look probably pretty stupid because everybody would sit there and go, you're right, I'm not going to pay my kid their allowance before they do it. And then if they do a shitty job, I sure as hell ain't going to pay them more for it. So why are we not doing that? Now you create a scenario where the biggest hit that Bernie Sanders haters go, how are you going to pass that in this polarized government? And then also the argument of, well, it's just you're pandering to the right. No, it doesn't have to be like that. You can make it to where you present a policy proposal where if you're actually against it, it's going to make you look like a moron. And it's going to make you go, you're right. Like, how can I answer no to that? So that's policy proposal number one. That's how we start getting this extra revenue. That's how we get people who are independents and maybe a little bit even right-leaning to go, you're right, it's not about overarching and stifling everything. It's about, you're right, you want to make America great again, we're going to make you earn it. We're going to get our revenue to have these programs now that we want to start going into. So that's proposal number one. Number two. Let's talk
before we go into two, I want to hear some reactions from David and from Bill about what number one might mean and what do they think. Because I think if we do all three of them, I think we'll lose the message. But I want to really focus on one.
Yeah, so,
I have my own opinions, but I want to hear what Bill and David have to say.
Bill, let's go with you, man. So you hear that you're a Trump supporter. Yeah. What is your opinion on a policy tax proposal like that?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's absolutely, these companies like Amazon, they pay zero in federal taxes.
Why?
Zero.
What are they doing? They're paying their people shit. Make them pay more.
I don't think that these big companies shouldn't get some kind of tax, discount. Obviously, that they're bringing a lot of jobs here, but to pay nothing?
Yeah.
Nothing.
And doesn't it make...
That's insanity to me.
And doesn't it make sense to sit there and go, earn it? What's wrong with making them earn a tax cut?
And even if they pay nothing, they end up paying nothing. Like, that in of itself doesn't piss me off. I mean, it doesn't make me happy. But like you said, why can't they do more? Especially when you have these CEOs and these people high up making these huge, giant bonuses. Even if their company has a shit year and you lay off a bunch of people, don't worry. The CEO still got his $30 million bonus. $30 million? You got to be shitting me. Like...
it's about money and politics.
But once again,
it's not like a broken record, man.
If you have that ratio, though,
we all know what the problem. The thing is, we all know what the problem is.
Yeah.
It's not that anyone's sitting around going, "Well, gee, I can't figure it out." We know what the problem is.
And as a voter, does it make sense to you?
Well, it makes perfect sense.
Does it make it kind of go, yeah, you're right. Like, why in the fuck? Why are we just giving them their tax cut without making them do anything first?
We'll say, well, we'll move all our jobs over here and we'll do this, and say, well, if that's what you're going to do, but again, it's one of those things. One of the things I did like about Trump is when he was talking about tariffs and things like that, and companies that you want to move jobs from America to other countries. We're going to take away certain tax breaks here, and that's one of the things I did like about Trump was not everything, but one of the things I like was at least he tried to get tough on certain things like that at times. So whether or not it works or not, that's debatable. But I did like that at least. On the outside, it appeared that he was trying.
It's simplicity.
At least calling people out
sense.
On it. And it's just you pay nothing. And again, we keep picking on Amazon, but You pay nothing in federal taxes?
But
how is it that I pay more in federal taxes than fucking Amazon? Explain that to me.
Now the thing is like the simplicity of it. Doesn't it make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, David, so you hear my proposal. Okay. What do you kind of hear?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that. I mean, here's the thing, so I don't know how familiar you are with the the golden age of economic expansion during
60s,
the
right?
50s, 60s, right?
Yeah.
There was a very high top marginal tax rate, and I think you're more talking about the corporate tax rate. This, I think, is more dealing with the personal tax rate. But what ended up happening was a lot of business owners, because the top rate was so high, they actually ended up keeping their money in their businesses more and reinvesting in capital and workers and increasing pay and things like that, because that incentivized them to keep their money in their businesses more without withdrawing. Now, corporations and everything were set up differently in that time period, but you're talking about incentives, and I think that's very much what you're talking about here. Is you're incentivizing that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
For Walmart to pay, you're talking about Amazon. Amazon, who forced Amazon to have a $15 minimum wage? Bernie, right? Because he put political pressure on Bezos. He had to stop Bezos Act he was about to put in with Ro Khanna, I think. But when you're talking about incentives, that's a very good way of doing that. The whole incentives game now is completely backwards, because the
totally
tax code and everything is written in a way that benefits the companies outsourcing jobs, paying people lower. That's the whole incentive structures is backwards. I mean, does anybody actually think that you deserve to pay more in federal taxes than Amazon? I mean, it's absolutely absurd. They had 11 billion in profit, not revenue, profit.
Oh, dude, don't get me started on being self-employed and my tax rate, man.
Right.
Dude, I will lose my shit. I'm gonna try to hold it,
And it's like, that is the problem. And it's just, I think you need it, like for tax code like that. I think you need a healthy blend of what you're talking about, with a healthy blend of, yes, taxing. I mean, how is it that billionaires, the top, I think 0.01 or 1% or whatever, paid less effective rate in taxes than an ordinary person? I mean, how is that even possible? There's so many loopholes. It's just
insanity.
And that's what's fucked. And that's why I chose the route that I chose, was because the argument that people make that everyone gets lost is, well, I chose corporate because they lump rich individuals with corporations, and it's like,
but
the rich people, the rich people are more individually just making money off dividends and shit. Everyone would agree, you got to tax the wealthy. Everyone would agree with that, but they lump it in. I think Republicans with the Democrats trying to overregulate, stifle, and I'm just like, all right, I'm going to beat your argument and go, all right, let's tax the wealthy, but why are we not making you earn your tax cut and just then leaving it like, we're going to hope that you invest in your people? And so that's why and the thing is that bold to you? Is that, as a Bernie Sanders supporter, if you heard any one of the other Democrats, it may not make you necessarily vote for him, would it get your attention of, that's new, that's bold? Would it get your attention and make you listen?
It's you're going to think this is interesting. It doesn't, I don't even think Bernie's proposals are necessarily bold. They're common sense, just like what you're talking about. I'm sorry. Yes. I know you guys might not agree with that, but
no,
I just think a lot of these things are common sense, and it just takes, like, Michael, you're a therapist, right? So you're probably pretty familiar, as I know Dan is, with the status quo bias, right? So, the people have a sense of rationalizing themselves why things exist the way they do, and the reasons we can't change that. But when you look, just take a international view of things. I've been to Europe plenty of times. Not plenty of times. I've been to a lot of countries in Europe, though, and you just kind of go over there and you see way societies run. You're like, wow, this is pretty good. I mean, it's a different world, and they do things differently there. And it's like, with this type of thing here, like you're talking about, why would that not be the case? I mean, it seems so obvious.
It's common sense
to a common person.
Yes,
to the ordinary person.
I think what matters to me, and I'm not trying to, again,
no. I was about that.
I really want to hear. The whole point is that we want to hear what David has to say. But I think one thing that's also relevant is that when it comes to any kind of policy proposals like this, and we haven't even talked about number 2 and number 3, and I want to hear them, is that what matters, I think, even more than the actual policy idea itself, is the premise upon which it is built.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think we're all in agreement that like the tax code is fucked. It needs to be resolved, and it needs to have a common sense of focus that appeals to the American people and to American businesses. The challenge with like the moderate voices that are coming out on stage is not that maybe the actual logistics of their ideas that they implement are bad or that they wouldn't work. It's that they don't do nearly enough to emphasize the premise upon which they're based. And so when we talked about that, like there's a lot of unity, a lot of similarity among like Bernie supporters and Trump supporters on a lot of stuff. And that's why there's like jumping back and forth between them. If you take the tactic of saying, well, I'm going to dive right into the details and we're going to talk about like all this tax code reformation and everything. If you don't solidify why you need to do it and why you're fighting for it, then people are just going to go, what the fuck's wrong? Well, and that's the challenge that a lot of moderates have, I think, is that they just go right for we can just tinker with the tax code, it'll be fine. It gives the air to people who don't understand what their motivations are, that all they care about is just like keeping the status quo, as David was talking about. And they don't say, the status quo is not okay.
Yes.
We need these reforms. We need something that's common sense and works for the people. Here's my idea to propose that. And that's what you did, Mike, with this idea, is that you laid that groundwork, and that's what a lot of moderates just don't do.
It's laying the groundwork of, hey, listen, we all agree on how messed up things are. I have a different way of approaching this, and I think it accounts for the things that I don't like. You don't hear that, and I'm glad you picked up on that. That's the exact approach I take on all these things, is that you can tell Bernie
that's what I liked most about Yang. It was his idea of human-centered capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
That was a new thing. He laid his foundation for all of his policies, and then all of his details, and we can go about into that too. But he went through and said he was not a radical. If you talk about the standard left-right spectrum, he was like not left, not right, forward. He was proposing things that like could be implemented, in my opinion.
Yes.
But what he did was he emphasized these are the foundations of my campaign, right? Universal basic income, because our America needs this. We need human-centered capitalism. We need a government that works for us. That message gets watered down when you are known to take corporate donations and are known to be glad-handing with people. If you say that, people will think you're full of shit.
Yeah. It's common sense, right? If you're going to pay money, you're going to expect to get something. So yes. So, all right. So, number one.
I want to hear number two, yeah.
Number two. I'm going to go into healthcare, all right? So, now I'm going to preface healthcare first, Coach, for like 3 seconds, right? So, the approach I'm taking with healthcare is, now, I will say right off the bat, I believe the end result should be universal healthcare. I will say that right off the bat. Now, my perspective, though, with universal healthcare comes from my dad. My dad was a chief resource officer and VP of supply chain for a healthcare system. He did consulting work before he kind of went into semi-retirement, where he worked. The consulting firm was solely healthcare consulting, opening up new hospitals, cost effectiveness. And one of the things my dad has railed against, and the one thing that nobody ironically is talking about, is the supply side of healthcare, and that's where 95% of the problems are. He goes, 5% of the discussion is on the supply side of healthcare. 95% of that problem is there. So in my plan for healthcare, it focuses on that component. And number two, how can we get universal healthcare passed while neutralizing the Democrats that are resistant and the Republicans that are resistant? So my whole thought is that instead of it being about this discussion of universal healthcare and about being the moral imperative, my whole thought is we need to get there. That's the destination. But to get there, the conversation needs to be about the supply side of healthcare. We need to get cost controls in place to where pharmaceutical companies, now we can use our tax code. That first thing that I brought up, that's why I led with it. We can, just like we can use the tax code to control basically what companies are hiring, firing, we can do the same exact thing with our healthcare companies, that how much hospitals are paying doctors, healthcare HMOs, what they're paying their boards, everything, right? We use that same principle to, on one end, use the tax code to basically create incentives for healthcare companies to lower the cost, control what CEO pay is, executive pay, bonuses. But on top of that, have the same system in place that we have for Medicare, Medicaid, what European Union, all the negotiating power. We have universal cost. We have to bring the cost of healthcare down. It is egregious, because the reality is if we were just to absorb all those costs right from the get-go, without lowering cost, we can't afford healthcare. The plan would be our total GDP right now, but that is not an excuse to not do healthcare reform. My plan, if we focus on reducing cost, as my father said, if you really look at the contracts and the greed, the corruption, you can lower the cost of healthcare by 30 to 40%. That cost that is actually being absorbed by our government. And if we really think about it, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, our government allows these pharmaceutical companies to rape our government and taxpayers because they're not paying the bill. They allow them to charge what they do and do that same bullshit about, well, if you don't do this, we'll have less medication. It's bullshit. If we lower the cost of healthcare and make that our number one goal, in and of itself, in that transition period with our HMOs, I worked for an HMO. I've been on those phone calls where we're about utilization review and lowering that. I worked on a wing of a healthcare company where it was about, how do we get you to not go to your therapist? How do we get you to not go and get admitted in an inpatient? So I know how they work. They serve the purpose that they want to make money, but while also keeping costs down. If their costs are lower for these medications, the procedures, all that shit, they're going to be less militant about how much they're rationing their healthcare. Because whether or not we wanted to admit it or not, our healthcare is being rationed, which the whole idea of keeping my plan because you like it, I fucking hate my plan. My wife's a nurse, and our healthcare plan sucks. But we also have to address the issue of when we have lots of hardworking people, like my wife being a NICU nurse, our daughter had a 3-day NICU stay, and we had a $15,000 bill. But then she goes, my frustration then when we have drug addicts who don't pay shit. And then why is it that we're rewarding people that don't take care of themselves, that actually contribute to the cost of healthcare more than anything? Not getting prenatal care, having the NICU stays, the preeclampsia, the diabetes, all these issues. Well then, okay, well why is it that we can bring the cost down? If we bring the cost down, now all of a sudden that giant price tag that Democrats are freaking out about, that price tag that Republicans go, this is why it's unaffordable, we take that away with one felt swoop. Now all of a sudden, if our focus is on lowering the cost in that transitionary period, that cost gets whittled down now to our HMOs and what we're paying for our premiums and then rationing the care. And then we put a price tag now on this new reduced cost. You take away and neutralize every argument to not have universal health care. And within that new tax plan that I have, we raise the revenue to where it is now affordable. It fits within our budget. Everybody wins. Maybe it takes 8 total years, 2 terms to make that happen. So, Dave, what are your thoughts?
So, I think what's interesting is that I don't know how much this is discussed in general, but I mean, Bernie does bring this up a lot. But, you know, if we do absolutely nothing, we keep everything the way it is, status quo, the next 10 years, our healthcare system is going to cost $52 trillion.
Yeah. How much is it our GDP right now? It's like
22%.
22.
Yeah,
it's
I knew it was
it's like between 19 and 22% of the last 5 years.
So if you look at every study that's come out on this, every single one of them, from conservative groups, the Heritage Foundation or the Koch funded studies and the progressive institutions, the most recent one from Yale found that it would save $450 billion annually. I'm talking about Medicare for all, and 68,000 unnecessary deaths every single year. Okay. So one thing that's not talked about, and it's intentionally not talked about by the media or by the people that are competing against Bernie for the primary spot, is that Medicare for all over 10 years is going to save about $5 trillion. It's reducing costs. What you're talking about, Michael, I do understand and agree with, but I think that the price tag thing that we're so shocked by is not, it actually already exists. We're just paying it differently, right? So like you're paying it through premiums, copays, deductibles. You know, you talk about this $15,000 bill that you're getting for your daughter, right? Like literally every other country on this earth, that wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. It's just like
every developed country.
Every developed country.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If there's like Western nations and like the where they have single payer healthcare or the national health system, like there's different structures.
Right. Sure.
And I think it leads into something that not to cut you off, David, but like you talked earlier about what things are off the table when it comes to business.
So there's the moral component, and then there's the economic component, which I think that like it's like a no-brainer to me. I'm sorry. I just think that when you have the government as the administrator, you actually will control more of what you're talking about with the cost and things like that, because that's what they do with Medicare. That's what they do that's what should be done with negotiating the drugs. I mean, to me, you have to do that. And the thing is, like, well, like you're talking about, Michael, about getting there, like getting to the universal coverage. Well, aren't we already supposed to be doing that with Obamacare? Aren't we already supposed to be getting there, going that way? Like, how long are we going to take to get? Like, it's just.
And that was like, and I'm curious to get your specific opinion on this one, because where I crafted it was seeing how hard it was to get a watered down version of Obamacare, because the part that they left out of Obamacare that was on the table that technically would have had the biggest effect was the community health centers. That instead of going to the ERs, they would have set up community centers where people could go there. We could control the cost, but they left that off, right? And then hearing Biden talk about this, how tough it was when we had the House and the Senate, how tough it was. And so what I kind of thought about was, in our current environment, what is the probability with how tough Obamacare was, and looking at the current map of seats gained and lost on both sides, I was figuring, would this be the best route of actually getting it passed and getting Republicans cornered into a position where they almost couldn't say no to it? That was my thought about it. What is your opinion on that approach and why I chose that?
So interestingly enough, I think that's an interesting approach, and that's, I think, an approach that a lot of the left or the Democrats tend to come at things with. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the wrong approach, because how many times do Republicans format their plans and think, how are we going to get Democrats to agree with this? Mm-hmm. They relentlessly fight for their base. And that is what Democrats have. They have basically said, fuck you to their base for the past how long now? I mean, really, honestly, how long have Democrats done that for? The thing is, it needs to be unapologetic. It has to be ruthless. Like I said, it will take a lot of, it's not going to just be the president and the Senate and the House. Like, that's a very top-down approach that a lot of politicians approach things from. Again, I think that's where Bernie differs, is his campaign, his whole thing relies on turning out a lot of voters, getting those voters to stay engaged, and then also go and demand that these things be carried out and say, hey, this was our will. We voted this in. And if the election goes the way that somebody like Bernie, if it's let's just say it's a total landslide, I'm just saying hypothetically,
yeah,
then it's going to be a big wake up to those politicians and say, well, shit, if we don't follow this route, then there's a whole line. I don't know how familiar you are with this. There's a whole line of people primarying Democrats and a whole new generation of politicians coming into the fold. AOC and these people are like the first iterations of that. There'll be so many of them that follow, especially if Bernie gets elected. Or regardless, this whole movement is just growing. It's just the seeds were planted in 2016. It's just starting to sprout now.
So I'm going to hold you to this one. I want you to help me understand this one. And I think a lot of moderates are sitting there going, okay, so if
sure.
Obama with a landslide in 2008, they got the House and the Senate, not a supermajority, if it was almost impossible to pass a really good healthcare, and they had to water it down with that. When you look at the current maps of what we're seeing with, I think at the best case scenario, maybe they can even up the Senate in a best case scenario. Given that scenario of how tough it was with Obama getting hits passed when they had that Senate and the House, given what's changed, do you have a realistic explanation as to how Bernie could get something like that passed? And then the second part to that question is, let's say it failed. Let's say it was blatantly apparent that the Senate, they are amazing, and Mitch McConnell's great at obstructing stuff. Is my plan a realistic backup that Bernie supporters would get on board with if it's apparent that it's almost impossible to get it passed?
Can I jump in before David answers real quick? I just want to give some context. So with the passage of Obamacare, something that was important to keep in mind, first of all, is that whenever there's been substantial healthcare reform, like talking about Medicare, talking about Obamacare, there's been a substantial majority in the House and the Senate and the White House, as well as, I believe, a Supreme Court majority in favor. So all three branches of government would need to be controlled by one party for any kind of major healthcare reform to have happen from the left or the right. And we saw it with the case where even when Trump had full control of the entire government, he didn't have enough of a strong control to fully repeal and replace Obamacare because he didn't have like this, not the super majority, but the substantial majority he needed. The second thing is that one of the public option was on the table during Obamacare negotiations when they had a substantial majority, and the Democrats voluntarily took it off because they listened to Republicans who didn't want it.
Yeah.
They did not have to do that. They they wanted to be the peacekeeper, so they took the public option off the table. And now the public option is like the idea that forms a foundation of like 5 of the 7 major candidates' policy, right? Because they did not implement it when they had that power.
And that's like, well, that is when they had that majority, they took it off the table because how tough it was going to be. So like,
no, because they thought it was going to be tough. They could have passed it. They didn't need the Republicans to agree. They did not need that support.
How many did they have? What was the numbers of the Senate during 08?
I can look that up real quick because the power of the internet. But they did not need. They only needed majorities. They did not. They just needed cloture in the Senate, and that was it.
Yeah.
But they did not need the super. They didn't. They didn't need to do that. They did it anyway.
While you're looking up, so Dave, kind of, do you feel like there is a legit, like, realistic? That's the thing I think a lot of moderates are looking for. Of like, okay, like, this is my experience with it. What can pass, or how can it pass?
Well, I mean, I think that, I'll be honest in saying here, like, this isn't my field of expertise, but I think that, in all honesty, do you have the stats, Dan? Did you?
I'm working on it. You keep talking.
No, but I think that it comes down to Obama. It got very confusing, like, with what actually they were trying to go for. Like, it just like Bernie's in this age, you have to be very simple, very concise, very easy to digest. You know, Bernie's every other major country has it, but it's so easy to understand. Every major country, developed country has one form or another of this, and it's going to save money, and it's moral, and it's ethic. Like, you just keep hitting it over the head and hitting over the head. You beat that into people's heads. Then guess what? When you have Democrats themselves who vote against that, goodbye, you're done. Like, we'll see you. You get primaried, you're gone. Like, you expect Republicans to be against it. Of course, they're going to be against anything or be against a public option. They're never going to agree on any of that stuff. So the theory of change has to be different. Like I said, you have to bring it in there. Now, when you're talking about realistic, ways of making it pass and everything, I don't know, but again, I think it's going to come down to some sort of negotiation, and you have to start from a strong position in that negotiation.
Do you see
just to jump in real quick, in the 111th Congress, which started in 2009, the Democrats controlled 59% of the House.
Okay.
And there were 57. They had 57 seats in the Senate, and then there were 2 independents who caucused with the Democrats. They had 59%, which was just above the like cloture mark for like the remember the whole nuclear option thing that happened early in the Trump administration. Like, they were short of that.
Okay.
So they only needed in the Senate one Republican to be like, yeah, fuck it, let's vote for this, right? And then they would have been able. That's what happened. They were able to pass Obamacare. They did not need. They were not so close to need at the 51-49. Like, famously, John McCain voted down the Obamacare repeal bill as a spite. Like that, when they had that sum of you have that sum of a margin, chances are you're not going to get something like major healthcare reform passed because there's going to be somebody you cannot get on your side for some reason, right? They were well past that need. They did not need. They were not going to have 9 Democrats vote against something that Obama was gunning for so long.
Well,
so that's just the context is almost 60%, which is enormous.
Well, and the thing is, like, and to close this one up, like, I'm really hearing you, David, is that it's like, listen, half the problem with Obamacare was like it wasn't even fucking clear of what the hell it was, and so if even with less people on maybe the side of Democrats, if you make it very black and white, very clear, very simple, then people will get on board because they'll maybe just realize that it just makes sense, and you put pressure on senators to go, I challenge you to kind of vote that down because it makes so much sense.
Well, even Obama wasn't even clear on Obamacare. He was telling everybody, you heard him loud and clear. You can keep your own doctorate. turned out you could keep your own doctrine. But I'm just saying.
Well,
so like,
No, it's very true. It's confusing.
Yeah, we're going to be confused.
No, a lot of the Democrats. You're right. The Democrats their communication is very bad. Like I'm talking about the Democratic establishment candidates. You know, they're so bad. Look how bad. I mean, I don't even want to get into this, but look how bad the impeachment stuff. I mean, it's like you had all these things you could have went at Trump on impeachment for, and you went after that. It's like it's just so bad. They're so bad at politics. It blows my mind. It really does. They're so bad. The Republican. Trump is very good at politics. Say what you want about him. He's good at politics. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to excite his base. It's like that's my problem with the moderates. They're like, let's see how we can get crossover Republican voters. You don't need them. Yeah. You need your base.
Put it this way, the Democratic leadership is kind of like the Cleveland Browns of leadership. They don't make really good decisions.
Yeah, you Ohio fuckers would know about that.
I know, man. I'm an Eagles fan, so it don't matter.
Well,
right?
I mean, look at the Democratic Party.
Don't say that when two yins are on the line, man.
I mean, the
Sorry, I think it was kind of go off.
Is kind of where like it runs where the Republican Party was after the 2012 election. I mean, the Republican Party was dead and buried. After that, it was they got to go back to basics. They're gonna lose a lot of elections coming up in the next few elections. Like they really need to get back to basics, and they've lost their way. And now it's weird just to see, 8 years later, it's kind of different.
Yeah.
And where it seems like the Republicans are better or worse, or the organized one, they have their base kind of under them. And the Democratic Party now, they're the ones kind of like, what are we
fucking
doing
lost
here?
in the weeds, man.
It's so it just that really amazes me, like how it's changed so much. Because I tell you,
why?
Included after 2012, I'm like, the Republican Party as a whole, they are in some big trouble for the foreseeable future.
Which actually, ironically, is what ushered in why Trump was Trump.
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to say. They were a mess until he came along and basically united that party.
Yeah.
And I think a similar trajectory would be needed for the Democrats.
I agree. So, all right, last one. I know we're running long on this show, but this is a very important topic.
Yeah, I got to get off somewhat soon here. But
last one. Yeah. Okay. So, college tuition. Now, thing is I owed over $100,000. I'm a grad student, and I'm like excited. I owe like 97 now, so yay me, right? And our repayment loan plans are for shit, right? And so, I'm not gonna lie. Like when I hear a lot of the plans of we're just gonna forgive the loans, right? I'm sitting there going, well, I owe a lot of money, but I also took them out. I know I was getting into, and I would love some forgiveness, but the thing is, I want to do something for it. I actually want to provide a service to my country. I would love to see veterans for free. I would see Medicaid, Medicare, which would, all right, I get some loan reimbursement, but I take that pressure off of the system when I'm seeing them for free, right? And so that's when I was thinking, like, well, all right, instead of just giving this shit for free, right? And it is kind of like a handout. It's like, do college students, because my fear is that if we raise all the taxes to pay for all of it, I do fear that the companies are going to take it out on the college students. And so is there a way of knocking out two birds with one stone with no risk? This is my plan. I want to create a service program kind of similar to AmeriCorps and expand it to where we have lots of STEM grads owe lots of money, and they could probably go and make $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 maybe for their first job, especially if they're grad students. But the thing is, like, we need to rebuild the infrastructure for this country. But because we're so broke and we're spending money on bullshit and wasted healthcare costs, we can't even afford to build the infrastructure. So let's knock out two birds with one stone. Let's have a program to where if you're a new college graduate and I will allow you to work for the government. We'll help you rebuild the infrastructure, especially our STEM fields. It could be a counselor working for the VA. It could be fill in the blank. You're going to make less money working for the government than you would if it was private industry, but we will repay your loans. You give us 4 or 5 years, however much amount of time, and if you give us that time, we will repay your loans for you. You help rebuild the infrastructure of this country. You help provide a service because that money is not going out to a triple wage. Because let's be honest, fat cat contracts with the government spending. You're going to be spending a lot less. Our college grads have now a real opportunity to get their money back for their loans. We actually have something that's not just a free handout. So it's everyone wins. Government gets good workers. You get experience. You get your loans repaid for. I'm even about with with gap year programs similar to what Israel. You got to go do the military. Do AmeriCorps. You need some money for your student for your college. Do service for a year, gap year. Do internships, co-op programs where we're going to help you pay for that. But you're doing something to help rebuild our country. You're helping rebuild the infrastructure. You're providing service. So instead of it being just about, hey, a free college, even for people like me who owe all that money, allow me to give back to my country and do something for it. So, David?
So it's a great idea, Michael. I have a question for you real quick. What did the banks who crashed the stock market in 2008 do to deserve their bailout?
Jack shit.
Right.
Oh, well, all right. So, all right. Well, in theory, jack shit. In reality, they held the country hostage, and basically the fear of, well, if you don't do that, you're not gonna be able to get money from your ATM machine.
Right. Exactly.
If we're being honest. Yeah.
No, you're right. So I think that it's one of those things where, like, I do think that what you're talking about makes a lot of sense. I do. I just think there will be a ceiling on like how many of those jobs can really exist, and
you are right, correct,
so on and so forth. And again, I go back to that international model. How many countries have tuition-free public college? A lot of countries do. A lot of developed countries do. And again, imagine if we looked at high school education in this way. Imagine if we said, well, we'll forgive your high school loans if you go work for, the public sector or whatever, however we want to frame that. The interesting thing to me is that we're now at a point where if you don't have some sort of higher education, trade school, higher education, whatever, you're kind of displacing the economy. And even if you do, the last I checked, it was like 50% of college graduates are either underemployed or unemployed totally. So you're not even guaranteed to really have a great job coming out of college to begin with. Like when my parents went to college, it was almost a guarantee. Oh, you're going to have a great job. You'll be able to, it costs very little amount of money. So you'll be able to pay that off quickly, whatever. You have $100,000, $97,000, whatever. And you're a therapist. You're a practicing, therapist. The fact is we're in such a mess right now that we do need some sort of, I think, some sort of drastic change to combat that. Now, after we get rid of that problem, I think something like what you're talking about makes sense. But I think we do need, there's so much data out there about how much the student debt crisis is keeping people from buying homes, from starting businesses, from starting families. And this is all going to have ripple effects within the economy. Like a lot of these things we're talking about, their effects are not just like people have debt. It's like that debt spider webs into so many other things that people can't do. We need, like, in the same way that these banks held the U.S. economy hostage. Well, you know what? The college debt is holding a lot of the American population hostage. So why can't we bail that out? My student loans are already paid off, but, and that's another dumb argument. Well, I already paid my loans off, so it's not fair to, like, that's just such a lazy way of looking at things. Like, we should want to make the world a better place no matter what part you're in. You should want to have the economy be a place that is setting you up for the best success. And the other thing I think, Michael, is interesting, as much as I think it's a good idea, it's like, everybody's not going to college a lot of people have aspirations and dreams and things they want to accomplish. What if I want to go to college and come out and start a business? What if I want to go to college and become a doctor or whatever? It's like, well, then I have to go work in the public sector. Like, people should be able to do what they want without being burdened with an extreme amount of debt that they can't get themselves from under. Imagine if buying homes was like that. Mm-hmm. So I just think that I think you're it's coming from a good place. I think that it's one of these things where that's a good part measure. And I really do believe that. Yeah. And I think it's something good down the road. I just think we're at such an impasse with so many of these things that, like, we do need radical change for a lot of this stuff. But I do appreciate where that's coming from, though. I think it's a good sentiment.
And I think, like, the bottom line is, and we'll wrap things up here, but when you hear, like, and the approach I was taking was, it's not just about going, that's fucked up, let's do middle of the road. It's more about, does it make you listen? If this were a candidate up there, I may not necessarily go, I still like my guy, but the thing is, right now, I'm not even listening to the other people. I'm talking 0% of listening. Does it make you go, I'm willing to listen what this guy now has to say because I'm hearing some things that, all right, sounds interesting. Does it make you listen a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely.
Does it make you redefine what a moderate could be rather than being on pandering to the right?
Well, here's the thing. I think moderate voters and moderate politicians are two different things.
Yeah.
Moderate voters, I mean, even you look at the polls from Nevada, I mean, most moderates voted for Bernie. So these labels that we give to people, like Bernie did very well with conservative Democrats in 2016. Like a lot of people don't know that. Like these labels we give to people are just, a lot of people hear things that go, yeah, I think that would help my life. I like that. Like, it's people don't vote along the, like we are people who pay attention to these things. So we understand the labels and these things a lot. A lot of people don't understand that. They just hear what makes it and they think is going to improve their lives and they vote in that way. Right?
They hear, just to jump in real quick, they hear, again, I sound like a broken record, that like 80 to 85% of what the unity factor is. Like they hear that, I hear your frustration. I understand that you're bad and have a burden of student loan debt. I understand that healthcare is too high. I understand that you can't get the job that you want. Like I hear that. And that validation is so important because the politicians who do confer that validation are the ones who are respected the most. And even if you don't listen, if you don't agree with their policies, you can at least trust that there's going to be a discussion. And I think that's where the problem is. When you talk about the moderate politician, like David said, like there are a lot of moderate politicians out there that have been in the game for so long or feel like they're too much of a politician that they're just going to say this stuff and they're going to kind of pander and then they're just going to kind of melt back into the status quo, as opposed to coming forward and putting that person focused, that voter focused thing, that the focus that people crave so badly. That's why Bernie does well. That's why Trump does well. And so you can be a radical moderate and say, I want these innovative solutions that no one's talking about because I care about you. If you don't do that, no one's going to listen. No one's going to
look how well that not being sympathetic to people's problems has worked for Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Yeah.
He said, I have no sympathy for millennials. Well, guess what? Nobody's going to vote for you then. So,
and that's why I wanted this little
it's hilarious.
And that's the thing where it's like, it's just amazing where imagine if the discussion that we had tonight was a discussion that was on the debate stage. It's a game changer. It would be, I imagine, David, like for you, it's like you probably felt more heard by me being a fictional candidate, and I could be wrong, but I imagine if I was a real candidate, would you sit there and go, I'm going to listen to this guy? I mean, once again, I still like my guy, but are we in the ballpark now of having a discussion about how we move this country forward with new ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is something that like me and Dan have always talked about. It's like, I mean, like think about when you argue with your girlfriend or wife or whatever, like, do you get anywhere by telling them how wrong they are? And no, you listen to people and you have to hear out their concerns and say, okay, I hear you. I just don't agree with your approach or whatever. Like, you talk in a manner that makes them feel heard, respected, and everything else. And it always surprises me that when a candidate's in the lead so much, politicians attack that candidate as if they're not trying to take supporters away from that candidate. It's like, maybe if you approach it with a little bit of faith, you might have a better chance of drawing people over.
Exactly.
As a quick aside, I thought it was just as we were starting. So just for those who are listening, we are recording this, like we started recording towards the end of the Democratic debate ahead of South Carolina. And it was really fucking funny. Pete Buttigieg tweeted, like it was one of his staffers when he was still on stage. He said something on stage that did not resonate well because he was trying to attack. What he said was, something he deleted the tweet. I'm going to have to paraphrase a little bit. What he said was, we are not going to get anywhere if we have a choice between Trump's desire to go back to the social order of the 50s against Sanders' vision of the radical politics of the 60s. And everyone just started eviscerating him on Twitter. It's like, wait a second, the 1960s was the civil rights movement. You're saying you don't want the person who's on the civil rights movement, who was on, like, actually campaigning for the civil rights movement. He was literally trying to put on a soundbite that sounded good because it sounded really rehearsed, and it was like, oh, it was kind of catchy, and it went through all the committees of whatever. Like, this is something that was sat down and around.
That's why nobody likes him.
I know
Like,
that, but that's where you have this disconnect, is when you, like what David says, when you try to attack somebody else in a way that just displays you as somebody who's a professional politician.
Yeah.
And then when you, Michael, come in and say, hey, I have these ideas, I'm going to listen to you. Yeah. I'm going to listen to Bill. We wanted to engage in these discussions because I have that fundamental trust that you are not in a corporate boardroom talking about, how do we best pander? Like, what is actually going to focus? Exactly. What is the ground truth? The ground truth is America needs better. I care about the American people. Now let's have that discussion. That is not been established among so many moderate candidates.
Exactly. And all I have is a different solution for the problems. And that's what it's all about. And that's what I hope we really accomplish. I have learned more this week about Bernie Sanders, his supporters, what they believe, that helped craft what tonight was. And that's where I'm excited for next week when we do the opposite. How can Bernie now actually go and beat the Democrats? And now, David, I'm going to lean on you this week. I'm going to be kind of getting some research from you as to, okay, what should this be? But in the same manner we talked about tonight. And this is the discussion that our politicians should be having. This is the debates that they should be having. New ideas. And remember, moderatism can be bold. It's just situated in a different realm. And so that's why I'm just so thankful for David, you trusting that we were going to represent Bernie Sanders supporters in the right light, having the right discussion. Dan, for trusting me to bring a friend on the show. Bill, you've been with me for 30 years, so I guess you're going to trust me anyway, I guess. But this is what the show is about. This is what this movement is about. We're holding you politicians, the media, accountable to. This is the discussions you should be having. And if you don't, people like me are going to take your guys' fucking job. And because we got
Already
better
happening.
ideas.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether or not we all agree, and we don't have to agree, and that's what I've said on social media all week. We don't have to agree. We have to respect each other and understand, and we can disagree, and that's fine. Can be respectful and all be heard. And I hopefully it came across that way. David, it sounds like it came across the right way. Dan, our neutral guy. Bill, we're all four different people, 4 different walks of life, 4 different age groups, and we all are friends. We all maybe disagree on some, agree on others. But imagine if this is where our country really was. And as much as our media and our politicians like to make us think that we are completely not, we're polarized and we can't have these conversations, we can. It's just then making us think that we can't, and that's the only way they win. And so on that note, I want to thank my guest, Dan, as always, my man. Thanks for supporting the show. Awesome friend of the show. Bill, the Armchair QB. Get him at armchairqb.net on the 614 network, the Armchair QB show. David, real quickly, where can we find you in your marketing, your band?
Yeah, so very quickly, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at the David J. Kelly. And then Tethra, you could just search that on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff. And then for marketing, socialramarketing.com.
Love it. I want to thank all my guests, and I want to thank all you listeners, and all the followers on Twitter, Facebook. I mean, it's awesome. We're growing, we're small, but we're growing by leaps and bounds, and I'm excited and I'm hopeful. And I think it's all we can really have at the end of the day. So on that note, everybody, I'm Michael Devine. And remember, next time somebody asks you, you a Democrat, you a Republican, you red, you blue,